Hello, everyone, and welcome to session 4. My name is Aaron Smith. I'm the CEO of EBA, and I'm joined by Nancy Bakeman, our Executive Vice President. And I'm proud to present From Bleeding Edge to Leading Edge, A Builder's Guide to Net Zero Homes, and Doug Terry. Today's session 4 is Beyond Net Zero and What's Next. And as I mentioned, I'm the CEO of EBA. We're really proud to have Doug Terry on the Builder Benchmark Group. And I'm really proud to represent EBA and our 50,000 members, which includes builders and their stakeholders across North America and really around the world, that truly are the early innovators and adopters that are driving sustainable transformation in the home building industry. So with that, Doug, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, Aaron. Well, you know what? Hey, it's round 4, eh? So
yeah.
Just like all the last 3 times, it's just like NASCAR, put our foot on the gas and go real fast and see how we do. This is, I think, a pretty interesting session. We're just going to start off with checking in with folks, see what their occupation is. So we've got a couple choices here: builder, architect, designer, energy rater, trade, contractor, manufacturer, government, or other.
Great. And just while we're waiting for that poll to come in, as always, we have the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. You can enter any of your questions there throughout today's presentation. Let's end. It looks like 2/3 builders and 1/3 architects today.
Okay, cool. All right. So I think you guys probably have been hanging out with me long enough now to know I'm president of Doug Terry Homes in St. Thomas, Ontario. No, I did not name the company after myself. That was my dad's idea. We've been around since about 1954, and I've done a whole bunch of things in the Canadian home building industry, both Ontario and Canada. I also like to do crazy things and go elsewhere to do work. So I've been down to Puerto Rico. We've done a bunch of different not-for-profit projects just to test the waters and do some different fun things. Today, we're going to show a little bit about some of those, but really this session is about where do we go after net zero. And as always, why are we interested in dealing with this? Well, because we want to make sure that we're creating a better planet or better opportunity for our grandchildren and their kids as we move forward into the future. So the agenda and objectives for today: offset increased costs of net zero by considering advanced framing and waste reduction, looking at panelization to overcome material and labor shortages, also for house building and construction. We're going to talk about LifeARK today. What happens when the grid goes down, and then developer, friend or foe, considering biodiversity enhancements. Aaron, you've talked a couple of times about doing carbon offsets, and I think there's a great opportunity to do that right in the subdivisions themselves.
Great.
And then a social contract, tiny home partnerships and affordable housing. So we think it's important to look beyond net zero because I think there's some things that are left out or missed, if you will, when we look at these programs. So that's kind of what today is really going to be more or less about. So here's the first one. It costs how much? Everybody has that sticker shock when they first talk about going to net zero. So I originally, in looking at writing the book, was asked if I would look at the cost to go from code to net zero and different details and that sort of thing. And what we really learned over the last year with COVID and the supply chain stretching to breaking point and everything just going crazy cost-wise is that it's almost impossibility to look at it. So we're not going to really dive into that per se, but I'm just going to give you some general parameters here, right? So if we're looking at the code situation, going from code up to, say, net zero with the Energy Star stop in between, we found that it was roughly $10,000 to $15,000, depending on size of home, to go from our Ontario building code up to Energy Star. Now that's several years ago now, of course, and that's Canadian dollars, so it's like a lot less than that in the States. And then to go from Energy Star up to net zero was roughly another $15,000, give or take, right? So you're thinking, wow, it's about 30 up, except for that Ontario's code went up as well. So the net result was that it was only really a difference of between $15,000 to $20,000 to go from the code built home all the way up to net zero, with Energy Star being partway in between. And that's still a significant amount. I'm not trying to downplay it. And certainly with your staff that have to sell this, thinking, well, how do I justify it? Yes, we can talk about better performance and that sort of thing, but if you've got, you know, that 30-second pitch window to convince somebody to do it, it can be difficult. So what we really wanted to do is see how could we compete. And so the
Doug,
next
that was
part,
that 15,000 was going to net zero ready, right? So
yes, sir,
it
correct.
didn't,
Yeah,
it
it's
didn't
about
have,
another 25 to put the panels on.
yeah. So if you're putting solar on the roof, 25,000 roughly. And what do you target? What's your, when you do your energy calc, do you typically need, is it 7 kilowatts of solar? Is it 8? Is it 9? What are you targeting?
We're going anywhere from say 7 to 10 on a big house.
Yeah. That's what I
so
feel
you're-
like is the sweet spot, right, Doug? I hear a lot of builders talking about that. 7 to 10 is about the sweet spot.
Well, we've got a limitation. You can't really go over 10. There's some ways you can play with it to get around it, but that's really kind of where we're trying to land, is getting it into that 7 to 10 range. So what do we got to do to get the building sizing down in order to meet that requirement? And that's certainly been a good deal of our effort over the last several years, but we're consistently hitting it. And that's pretty cool, because even though we're mostly net zero ready, we know that as panel costs come down and energy costs go up, our homeowners are in really great shape to be able to convert their homes over to full net zero, right? But I often hear, well, it's too expensive. So the question is, how can we compete? And that's really what we're going to dive into in the first part of the session today. We worried as a team going to Energy Star as our standard, but what we did find is that it worked a lot better as a standard than it did as an option, right? When it was an option, we're back to that question of, well, if it's so good, why isn't it standard? So we did find it worked better that way. That being said, our team was extremely concerned about going to net zero. And the biggest reason is that net zero didn't really have a lot of cachet, if you will. Energy Star is such a recognized brand, but net zero is kind of fledgling. It's new. It's not really out in the marketplace to the same extent whatsoever as Energy Star. And so the team were worried about a muddying of the waters, and would we have clear messaging? Would people understand that there's a different level that we're looking at here? So what we ultimately, what we were worried about with that as well was, well, what about the builders that are out there that are putting all the glitz and glamour and the pretty stuff in there? And how do we compete against that when the homeowner buyer walks into the showroom and sees, well, there's that pretty quartz countertop or whatever the latest bling and pizzazz is, versus we're putting our effort into our walls and our mechanicals and our windows. How do you demonstrate it? And, you know, we've done a lot of work. Today's session doesn't really cover that. What we wanted to do, though, was level the playing field. And part of that, we didn't want to be uncompetitive price-wise. So we had to really look at how we were going to make this a more level playing field. And we did it by leaning out our process and our builds. So first bit is how to lean it out. So Aaron, do you remember this movie, Gung Ho? This was
Barely.
This was by Ron Howard, and it had one of my favorite actors, Michael Keaton, in it, right? It's the story of a Japanese auto manufacturer that comes into, I think it's Pennsylvania, and they take over a factory that's been shuttered for about 6 months, and they bring back some of the workers, and it's this massive clash of cultures between the Japanese managers and the American former union labor force. And the American workers that were really pushing back against the Japanese managers, who they felt were just very too obsessed with quality and efficiency compared to what they were at. Well, ironically, that movie really resonated because it was right at the time when America was suffering North America really suffering a serious crisis about quality. And why were the Japanese better? Quite simply, it was Dr. Deming. So this is a little brief backgrounder on Dr. Deming, right? So Edwards Deming, he was a prominent consultant. After World War II, he was sent over to Japan to rebuild their economy, right? And he's got all these really awesome, famous quotes that are attributed to him on his concepts of management and lean thinking, right? So he was actually awarded the Second Order of the Sacred Treasure for his teachings in Japan. And that's what led to the Toyota Way and a bunch of other Japanese teachings and principles. But I love this one here on the bottom left here. Defects are not free. Somebody makes them and gets paid for making them, right? If you've got a bad system and that work is processing out into the field and the product you're building, somebody's getting paid to do that work, even if it's really bad work, right? Another one that I really like is it's not necessary to change. Survival is not mandatory. And that really kind of sums up the concept of being on the path of continual improvement. And we talk about that all the time within our company, and certainly, leading edge builders are constantly on the path of continual improvement, looking at different ways to improve their processes, their flow, et cetera. So the thing that was the real turning point for North America was this documentary done by NBC, If Japan Can, Why Can't We? And it came out in 1980. And what happened after that is Ford Motor Company, who were in a lot of trouble, they lost about $3 billion that year. They brought Dr. Deming in to help them with their turnaround. And within about 5 years, Ford had overtaken General Motors for productivity, for advancement of design concepts, and for profitability. And it was by embracing Deming's concepts of lean thinking, and that's where Ford Quality is Job One concepts came from. He wrote a book, well, he wrote many papers as well, but it was originally called Quality and Productivity and Competitive Position. And that was renamed Out of the Crisis in 1986. In it, he has his theory of management, which includes his 14 points of management. So just really briefly, we're not going to get into it in great detail here, but here's the 14 points. Create constancy of purpose, adopt a new philosophy, cease dependence on inspection, and the practice of awarding businesses on the basis of price tag, improve constantly. That's the one I always wrap my head around, is the path of continual improvement. Institute training, we do a ton of training. Institute leadership, I like to think of the circle of six in leadership concept. You can't really manage more than 6 people well, so try and have your circle of 6 within your company so that each leader's got a limited number of people they can really focus with on. Drive out fear. We have a communication loop within ourselves and our sub-trades and staff, so people are enabled to bring back, hey, this isn't working, can we try this? Or hey, we could do this better. Break down barriers. So, one of the hardest things to do, and we're going to talk about this, is thinking about how you're building as being, it's a sacred cow and we can't change it, right? Eliminate slogans, exhortations, and targets. Install pride of workmanship. Abolishment of the annual merit rating. Education and self-improvement. We actually provide a fund for our employees to get continuous training outside of our company, so beyond what we offer. And then transformation. So there's a lot of details. I've included a link onto a website here for folks so they can go back later and have a peek at some of Dr. Deming's thinking, but it's incredibly important. Now, what's really interesting though, is that our industry, as Dr. Stebrick would say, we're still building with sticks and pins after 100 plus years, right? And we haven't really done a lot of adaptation into lean thinking. So a few years ago, actually quite a few years ago now, we decided to find out, is our baby ugly? And so this is the question I ask, is your baby ugly? And it was a good friend of mine from True North named Hal Peller, who's our facilitator for our lean training. He does a whole session on is your baby ugly, which is really fascinating. And it's about the sacred cow. Are you doing something that isn't providing benefit? The example that Hal used was his family had a famous roast beef recipe, and he would always, they would cut the ends of the roast beef off. And, it was beautiful flavor, everything like that. But he went to his mom and says, why do we cut the ends of the roast beef off? And she says, I don't know, dear, it's tradition. You'll have to ask your great aunt. Your great aunt says, well, maybe if you ask your great grandmother, who was still alive at the time, why? And so he did. And she says, well, you see, we lived in an apartment in Brooklyn, and the stove was only so wide. And so we had to get a smaller pan in order to fit in the stove. And we had to cut the ends of the roast beef off so it would fit in the pan. Fast forward 50 plus years, and they were still doing it the same way. That's not lean. And so that's, your baby is ugly, because you haven't changed with things that have changed. So First, I like to look at a Japanese term called MUDA. What is MUDA? It's a Japanese word meaning futility, usefulness, wastefulness, and is a key concept in lean process thinking. Waste reduction is a really effective way to increase profitability, and we're going to talk about that today. From an end consumer's point of view, value-added work is any activity that produces goods or provides a service which a customer is willing to pay. MUDA is any constraint or impediment that causes waste to occur. So there's two basic types of MUDA. The one we're focusing on today is the second one, which is non-value added and unnecessary for end consumers. These contribute to waste, incur hidden costs, and should be eliminated. And that's really what we did when we did a very deep dive. So there's 7 wastes of lean to look at. There's transport, which is moving products that are not actually required to perform at the time. Waiting, it is the next production step, having to wait. On the construction site, that could be as simple as the workers are waiting for the job foreman to confirm a detail with the designer because they don't understand it and they can't proceed. Another reason for waiting is if the job site's not clean and somebody's got to stop and clean it up. Motion, people or equipment moving or walking more than is required. Well, if you've got to clean up the job site because somebody didn't clean up their own mess, that's wasted motion, right? Overproduction, production ahead of demand. So for example, this past summer, we got caught, we put in too many foundations and started framing them. And now we've got an excessive amount for what we actually need for our current demand cycle. So we've got a bit too much there. Over processing resulting from poor tool or product design, and then inventory, all components, work in product, and processed and finished products that are in excess or not really necessary at the time. So managing our inventories. And I know typically we would say just-in-time delivery is perfect, right? Except for we're in a time of COVID and distressed time frames on our supply chain. So if anything, this is now the time to actually work a little bit in the opposite direction and managing our supply lines by having a little bit of extra inventory so that we're actually able to close those homes, because you don't get paid if you don't close the home. One of the things I like to do with MUDA is called a site walk. What's in your dumpster? And so we'll routinely go out and check the dumpsters. And what we're trying to do is eliminate waste, right? So you do a site walk for MUDA, you're checking out all of the jobs, say where materials being stored, thrown, abused. One of the worst things you want to have happen is 2x4s or 2x6s on the ground in the snow. What we did find was overall smaller dumpsters equaled smaller materials discarded, so less waste. And that was something that, ironically, when we first started doing this, none of the other builders in our area were on board. And then by about 2 years ago, every other builder was using this exact same system, because it just makes such a difference in reducing waste. It's not perfect, though. I wish I would say it was an overnight success. It wasn't. We still had to manage different job sites. This one happened to be a different framer in a different town we were working in. And they didn't quite get the message early on, and we had to go back in and do some retraining with them. So you have to train the trades and the site supers to be successful at this. You have to be able to understand what the desired outcome is, so everybody is able to get to the desired outcome. We actually implemented a sorting and restocking program with the lumber supplier. And we do find that we recognize our trades that keep an organized job site because they work more efficiently. And ultimately what they realized is they get more jobs because they can do them faster. We have to make sure our site supers reinforce the safety scope of work. Like I said, you definitely do not want to have that mess right there with snow on it, because somebody's going to slip on it and break an ankle and they'll be out for 6 weeks, right? It's just not a lot of fun. So ironically, that bin right there, it would have been empty at the time. Really could have taken a lot of materials in it, but there was wood there that should have been restacked and ready to go. We ultimately implemented a program where our lumber manufacturer supplier would come and pick up and restock the products for reducing our costs, right? So we did the Lean Blitz in 2014-15. We brought in True North, a company that's based out of Michigan, for an in-depth review of the trade process. We ultimately identified $800,000 in potential savings during our blitz. That was about a 1 week deep dive with all of our core crew. And to the point, Aaron, that we actually had our plumber come up to me about 3 years later and said, you know, I haven't given you an increase in price in 3 years because your job site's so much more efficient than the other builders that I don't need to increase my price. That was pretty cool information to get back. And that ultimately was so successful in 2019, we did a lean company audit. So our internal processes, we did our base mapping and then COVID hit and we weren't able to finish the project overall. But we learned a lot and we've been implementing a ton from that ever since. So a couple of the really important takeaways, and I don't know if you've been on job sites that do this, Aaron, but job ready, job complete, and broom clean. Are you familiar with that?
No, not really.
What you want to do is your site supers have to make sure that this is the way the work's happening. But as each trade's finishing, their job should be complete, which includes broom clean. So you're not talking you can eat off the floor, but you want it so that it's safe to walk into the room. Not a lot of things stacked in the way so it doesn't interfere with the flow for the next trade. And so that's job ready is ready for the next trade. The site super is the one that verifies that. The trade says their job is complete, and part of the job being complete is that it's broom clean, right? We also implemented what's called a Builder Supplier Trade Alliance. We're in our 7th year now. The president of our Builder Supplier Trade Alliance is one of the trades, actually our lumber manufacturer's site guy is our president of our BSTA, and we meet basically monthly. A couple of weeks ago, we had a barbecue for all of our trades. We had 130 guys and gals show up to it. And that was a really cool way to say thank you to everything that they do. But it's about a communication loop on a continuous basis. We have a form that's the job ready complete form. And we also are looking for, is there safety issues, constantly looking for safety issues. We also like to address where's the pain? What is one trade doing that is causing another trade pain? And can we eliminate it? Or worse, what is something that our company is doing that's causing a trade pain that we can eliminate? And we have to really look at that. An easy one was garbage pails going down the stairs into the basement to muck out the basement. And they were scratching up the drywalled walls because we were having them do it after the paint was already done and the painter had to come back in and repaint the walls. So things like that are real pain points that you want to try and eliminate. Another big one is wasted trips. So, you know, the guy comes out and he's going to the job site and then he finds out the job's not ready for him. So then he's got to leave and then he's got to come back another day. So he's not just losing that trip, but if he can't assign his guys additional work that day, it means they've lost production for that day. And so it's very costly to have wasted trips. And we put quite a bit of effort into trying to really eliminate that. So the job should be ready on schedule for the trade to come in and be able to do that. So very, very cool way of reducing pain, but also reducing costs. So it's not just about eliminating our own company's costs. It was about making our trades more profitable. And by doing that, they weren't needing to give us as many increases. They were able to absorb different things without it ever getting into any form of rebid with them. How ugly was our baby? It was really, really ugly. I often say that when we look at this, before we did our lean blitz, we were building at the time coming up on 80 homes, but we were still thinking of building 50 homes, but with processes from when we were doing 35 homes. And so we were really not well organized for the volume that we were doing. So we went about to try and change that. One of the things we did, we implemented that job ready complete form. We created that Builder Supplier Trade Alliance, like I mentioned. It's been really successful. In fact, True North tracks the different Builder Supplier Trade Alliances that they've set up, and ours has been going. We're one of the longest running ones in North America now. I love looking at where's the pain, constantly looking at, you know, where's the pain, what are we doing that's hurting others, and can we fix it, or hurting us internally, right? What we're really working on now, though, is addressing our internal processes as we go from, you know, 80 to 110 to 130 to 170 now this year to 200 next year homes. We just have to think differently and adapt, right? So I'm just going to do a really quick intro on optimal value engineering, because we're going to go off into a version of that, or a portion of that. Really, it's size to fit, right? So we want to try and design homes in wherever possible in 2-foot increments. You don't get 2x4s that are 7'6" or 8'6". They come in, lengths that are designed to fit in an 8-foot wall. Another one is the room being 12'6" wide in both directions for a bedroom, say, and carpet comes in 12 feet. So now you've got a 6-inch spin that you got to put in there, which is kind of wasteful. Another one is about looking at removing over detailing. So when I talk about Scott Saddam from True North, a big pet peeve of his, and I still have some of my plans, I'm not perfect, I get it, is shutters that don't actually function and don't actually fit the width of the windows. They're just there for pretty. And although they do look nice, it's not something that really the customer necessarily would be willing to pay for if they knew the cost, right? So question up here is, has your company done a lean process review? Now, if Tim O'Brien's on the call today, then I know he has, because he's another True North client.
Okay, the poll.
Silence.
Yeah, the poll is open, but we've only got a couple
Okay.
that have voted. Well, we only had two folks vote, and they both have done lean process review.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so keeping on going. Advanced framing. There we go. Advanced framing. Do you know much about advanced framing, Aaron? Have you looked into that at all?
I've done some of the CI courses on advanced framing.
So this will look pretty familiar for you then. Really what we're talking about is, what's our stud size? What's the width of it in the wall? On a typical, 1,500 square foot bungalow, you go from a 2x6 wall at 16-inch on center up to 24-inch on center. You're taking about 3 feet of wood out of the wall, right? That's pretty incredible, because it's that much more insulation you can put into the wall, right? And the insulation's got a lot more effective R value than the wood does. So this just kind of shows in an 8-foot increment, 7 studs at 16-inch on center versus 6 at 19.2 versus 5 studs at 24. So that's kind of giving you the rough math, and you extrapolate that out around the entire house. It's quite a few less studs, right? And then you've got all your interior framing. We do our interior framing at 19.2 on center just to make the drywall a little bit more beefy, right? So here's a typical detail problem, and I see this all the time, is that they've built a corner here that it's really tough to get insulation into. And so that's a pretty bad thermal bridge, a lot of opportunity for moisture buildup from the dew point. We want to try and avoid that wherever possible. So what we looked at doing is try it out, a 2-stud corner versus a modified 3-stud corner. And what we ultimately found is, with the 2-stud corner, you had a 1/2 inch of OSB and a 1/2 inch of foam for about 4 feet in on each side. 3-stud corner, you just went straight rigid insulation. So ultimately, we ended up going with the 3-stud corner, as I've shown it here, and we've been building it that way for a decade now.
Doug, is that what we would know in the United States as the California corner?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So the detailing on it is like I'm showing here. So you've got room for quite a bit of insulation, but then it's got the rigid insulation. We now have 1.5 inches of rigid insulation on the outside. So really good opportunity for getting insulation in there and reducing that thermal bridge. But it's also important to understand that from a framer standpoint, and there from a cost standpoint, it's a lot less work. Right, you're basically adding one more stud, but then you're reducing the other steps by having more continuous rigid insulation on the outside, not having to have the OSB as well, unless you've got a wall that's fully OSB sheeted. So it makes a big difference. We also do, say, angled T-bracing for our racking at party walls, that sort of thing. But the angled T-bracing is in place to the OSB on the outside, right? I got ahead of myself. Intersecting walls. We used to do a lot of T-brace. We're now moving more to be ladder framing, which is just a little bit variation difference on it, but it gives the ability for us to get insulation in behind the stud wall as opposed to driving the wall all the way out to the outside and adding a big thermal bridge. So that's pretty important, but quite easy to do on the intersecting walls. So that's an example of what a T-framing section would look like. Ladder framing is as simple as it says. It's just doing, scrap pieces of lumber 2 foot on center up the wall between the two sides, and then putting your intersecting wall up against that. It's basically just giving you a drywall framing platform, but you're using up the excess lumber, so it's pretty cost effective to do. Here's a big one: window headers. We actually size our headers to the load from above. So if you only need 2 2x4s on this, because that's what the design load says, then that's what we use, right? So a lot of builders, they just have it set as spec that you're doing 2 2x10s. Don't even think about it. That's just what we do. It's putting a lot more wood into the house that doesn't necessarily need to be there if you can understand advanced framing and get your trades figuring it out. Typically, when we're working with a new young framing crew, that's one of the things we have to really work with them on to get them to understand it. But once they get it, pride of workmanship kicks in and they're trained on it, they really don't have issues with it. Now, we're not dealing with framers that are coming out of a union background, so that might be a bit of an issue. And if you do have a language barrier on your job sites, then by all means, the construction instruction app has got some really good detailing on how to do advanced framing work as well. One thing to be careful of as well, we have a lot of Mennonite framers up here, and I love those guys. They're fantastic framers. You just got to make sure that they understand that they don't have to put excess wood in. So I'm going to get to that in a second. One other thing you can look at is giving the framer the ability, if you don't have a framing plan, go to 22.5-inch wide windows, and you can actually space them into the two 24-inch wide opening, right? So it just means they have to adjust where the window goes a little bit in order to keep the framing consistent. But it does reduce the amount of cripples and lintels and a whole bunch of other stuff. One thing about BIM design is that's going to help us be able to actually standardize the whole framing platform for them. But this is where I've seen jobs where you've had 4 and 5 cripples underneath of a window that maybe needed one on each side, and they were just going to town on the wood because they love the wood, and they cut it a certain length, and so they're shoving more in there than they need. And you have to really work on breaking that habit, because you're putting way more wood into the building that could either be used elsewhere or on a different job, right? And as much as we like wood from a carbon sequestration standpoint, putting an excessive amount of wood in isn't really necessarily the right thing to do if it can be reducing our carbon footprint by putting it into a different home. So we do want to be careful of cripples and overloading. The double plate, I see that so often out on the job site with other builders' jobs, and I don't understand it. It's just not doing any function whatsoever, because that sill plate at the bottom being a double plate is overload. There's no load there. There's no necessity for having it, right? So that's what our window looks like. And so the load is being carried all the way down by the two kings on the side. And we basically have very little underneath the window, just enough to hold up the center of the window. The rest of it's framed into the side. That'll vary somewhat based on the engineering requirements of the window, especially if it goes above a certain size and depending on what the loads from above are. But that's a pretty common detail. And you can see from the photo timeline there, it's we've been at that for more than a decade now, right? Single plate, no cripples. Stacked framing, that's their double top plate. So we like to still use the double top plate. It's just a little bit stronger. And quite honestly, the industry is not really set up for single top plates. Your drywall wouldn't quite work, right? You'd have a bit of excess cut from your drywall that you'd be wasting anyway. So we found that this works really well for us. This is one piece that we don't go all the way into advanced framing, because we just found it was a difficult point that made it pretty tough to implement in the field without having a lot of problems. but we do stack frames. So our trusses are lined up over top of our studs, which is supposed to go down and line up with the floor plate below, depending on what type of floor design is there, of course. So our summary of advanced framing, we do 2x6, 24-inch on center. Interior is 2x4 at 19.2, unless it's a load-bearing wall. Openings, we right size our headers. We do single plates, cripples as needed. Stacked framing of trusses to wall studs, and then T or ladder framing at intersecting walls. Where we differ, like the double top plate and the 3-stud corner with the rigid insulation and the T-brace. But it's pretty effective and it's fast to frame. That's really what we were looking at. Next one is, does your company do advanced framing? So I guess we'd be asking a couple of builders on the call if they have looked at advanced framing.
Yeah, and hopefully both poll questions came up. I guess our last, well, it looks like we got to know, because our last question, only the yes came up. So I apologize for that. We'll wait a couple seconds on the voting. So right now we're 50-50 on, 67% yes and 33% no.
Okay. So, cool. That leads us to a conversation about if you've done.
Hey, Doug, if we could go back to the last picture, because I know there's something you taught us in a previous, but we had a comment that they like the hurricane clips, and that was a critical cause of the damage in Barrie recently with the tornadoes.
Yeah.
I know you showed us previously the hurricane screws that you're able to put right in between the joint in the double top plate and drive up into that truss.
Yeah.
Can you just talk about that detail and the resiliency aspect of that?
So this was this photo was taken about 10 years ago. I just have never gotten around to replacing it because it was a nice photo.
It is nice.
But the screws didn't exist at the time. The screws are relatively new. They've been around for about maybe 3.5 years. And we piloted the use of the screws actually when we were on our mission in Puerto Rico. Right down to Simpson Strong-Tie gave us this little gun that you could attach to your drill. And that was for shorter people going into taller heights, so they didn't have to get on the ladder to try and make it faster. I think I still got it in my closet here. We've used it a few times. But that's the reason why you're seeing the hurricane clips here as opposed to the screw, is because the screw didn't exist when I took this photo.
Well, I think it's a great example of your continuous improvement, Doug, that, the clips, it causes a little bit of drywall issue probably at the top, and looking for this new technology that's faster to install. I mean, hurricane clips are what, 6 nails in each one?
No, they're 10. There's 5
10
and 5.
nails. 10 nails. And now you got one screw going in doing the same job.
Yeah, so 10 nails with a guy that's good on a gun. It'll take him a minute to do it. The screw goes in about 8 seconds. So same price on the cost of the material. Which one do you think they want to do, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is you are right that the hurricane clips do cause some drywall hiccups. You can get a bit of bowing at the top if you're not careful. And so you do want to be aware of that. Whereas the screw, when it's installed correctly, there is no issue with bowing whatsoever, right? Yeah. Yeah, I forgot about that slide having the old detail, but we still do use hurricane clips if they're required, right? It just depends on the loads. Sometimes we do like a saddle clip as well, right?
Sure.
So vertical integration, this is something that I've had a few chats briefly with Sam Rashkin about over the couple of years of going to his different sessions about disruptive technology and where we're thinking we're going to go, and should we be looking at things like panelization. So I wanted to just give a brief definition about what vertical integration is. Not everybody is going to want to do this. Some builders will be more interested than others, but vertical integration, it's a strategy whereby a company owns or controls its suppliers, distributors, or retail locations to control its value or supply chain. Benefits the companies by allowing them to control processes, reduce costs, and improve efficiencies. It also refers to mergers of companies that are in the same business but in different stages of production or distribution. For example, Imogen John Shoes Limited, a major shoe manufacturer, merges with Shoe Retail Inc., a chain of shoe shops that is an example of vertical integration. Or in our case, We started an HVAC company because we had to. So yeah, that was fun. But I'm going to get to that in a second. Right now, what I'm going to talk about though is if we look at the lean concept and then we take the lean concept to advanced framing, the next step is, does it benefit us to look at panelization? And I think that there's a cut point here where you're going to have smaller builders, and I still consider myself a smaller builder because we're going to maybe do a couple hundred homes a year. So I may be mid-size, I guess, as opposed to the big nationals that are doing thousands and thousands of homes a year. I can't afford to build a major factory. And the other problem with building that major factory is eventually it's not close to your job sites. So what we're looking at is panelization a little bit differently. We're actually doing a joint venture partnership with another builder, Carwood Homes, and we set up a sub company called the Carbon Reduction Company. So it's the joint venture partner on behalf of DTL in the LC manufacturing. My nephew Shane is taking on the role of general manager at the LC manufacturing. And what we're basically doing is we're creating a mobile panelization plant so that we're able to go into a subdivision and blast out multiple units and then pick up and move, kind of like a MASH unit in the old TV show MASH. It's a lot like that, right? So it's mobile. It's designed to be able to be put on a flatbed and move to the next site. What's really cool about this is if you look at panelization plants that are in a factory setting, and that doesn't mean we won't put a tent there to protect the elements from the materials and the laborers from the elements. But what we're talking about here is a factory that's say 60 kilometers away. You know what they're shipping majority of when they ship that 60 kilometers? Air. Yeah. Unless you've got a fully assembled wall, you're shipping air. So what we're trying to do is reduce the amount of time we're shipping air by getting it closer to where the need is. And I'm going to show some examples coming up of panelization of where we're heading on this. But it's pretty cool. So you've got basically there's a sub-assembly table. That's where you're doing your lintels and headers. And then you've got your framing table. So the lintels and headers would slide over and drop in. Or there could be a floor line that you're doing if you're doing floor templates as well. And then from the framing table, you go over to the sheathing table, and that's where you can put your sheathing on, your Tyvek on. We're even looking at potentially putting the windows in at that point so that they're already ready to go. So when it gets to the job site, it's craned in place just like Lego, right? Genie lifts are the way we're going to be doing the majority of this. And then you've got your trailer for moving it around. Now, one thing that we are really strongly looking at is being able to do a different jig for doing trusses so that we can build the trusses perhaps in 8-foot increments and then crane them up so that we're putting guys less time on the roof. It's probably the most dangerous part of the job is when guys are up, going around like monkeys in the roof. It's hard to get your harness on. You've got to be able to move in and out between the trusses. It's a pretty dangerous situation. We think it's a lot safer if we do it on the ground. And that's what we did when we did Hope. We did it on the ground and craned it up, right? So LC manufacturing, I love this quote. I feel the need for speed. You know who that's from? That's from Pete Maverick Mitchell from Top Gun, right? And that's really what advanced framing and panelization ultimately is looking at is when you can get the panelization, you're talking about dropping time out of the job site. So actual production time of framing can be dramatically reduced. Instead of 3 weeks on a house, it might be 4 days by using a panelization system. And that's really what we're looking at doing is cutting our cycle time, especially now in the time of COVID. It's been so difficult to manage cycle times that we think that this is one of those pieces for getting us out of that, right? So with panelization, timing is measured in increments of minutes, not days. And we really have to look at the number of steps being taken to limit the number of steps so that it's much more efficient as we're flowing through. We are looking at our apartment buildings, which we're starting to build now, being a combination of element 5 cross-laminated timber, which I'm going to show in a second, and the LC manufacturing panelized framing. So the two working kind of together, figuring out the structure, they do the structure, and then we do the infill walls, right? So that's coming up our next site that we're going to be doing, and I'm going to show a bit of that coming up. So this is what element 5 can do. They're able to do shear walls like what's shown here on the upper right. Imagine if you're doing a 4-story apartment building and you've got an elevator shaft in it, because you will, right? And it's going to have cinder block, which is a high carbon footprint. Well, it takes 3, maybe 4 weeks to build that, especially if you got to do it in winter, it's going to be even longer. They stand their shear walls up for the elevator shaft in a day. What sounds better, 4 weeks or a day, right? So the floor system is really cool. You can see down here in the bottom right, the floor can become the ceiling as well. So we're really excited about this. We can get good sound balancing out of it. But effectively, with the floor system that they're talking about that we're going to be using, we can actually knock out roughly 1 foot per floor. So in a 4-story building, we're dropping the height of the building by 3 feet. So that's 3 feet less material without affecting your headroom and your suites whatsoever. That's cool, right?
Doug,
And they're right here in St. Thomas, Ontario.
Okay, that was my question. Where's Element 5 out of?
Yeah, they actually are on a rail spur, and they bring lumber in from northern Ontario, and they have a really cool picking process. So, you know, when you've got a 2x6 stud and you've got a little bit of the bark on the outside, they can't use that. They have to have pristine studs that are, you know, fairly straight. They've got to be dry. They put them through a kiln, but it's got to be, because they're laminating these together, it's got to be very close proximity to perfect on it. In fact, they actually will plane them in order to get them to basically perfect so that they'll fit together with no gaps whatsoever. And that's how they get their strength, right? Well, what happens is they're going through this pick process, and all of a sudden they've got all this excess lumber. So what we're doing now is we're buying that excess lumber from them and using it up, because it's better than some of the lumber we've been getting with the supply chain issues. So that's helping to get your cradle to gate down, right? Which we think is pretty cool. We also are looking at the long-term potential of being a supplier for them for other projects that they're going to do, because as we're working out the methodology with them, we're showing them from a building science standpoint and a builder's costing standpoint, you know, where the sweet spot is, so that hopefully they'll get more buildings. So we see it as a really cool ongoing partnership. And right now, Aaron, we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, 1,700 units that we're going to be able to do over the next decade for land I either have now or under option. So we're going to get real good at this working with them. So we're really excited about this. Briefly on mechanical systems, we had a really bad phone call about 6 weeks ago now, and our HVAC contractor basically said they were giving up the London market because they were just having a tough time with getting staffing and what have you. And so we went from 6 weeks ago finding out we were not going to have a mechanical company to 4 weeks ago we started our own. We bought out their assets in the London market, and we spun up a company and got it up and running in literally 2 weeks. It was just crazy, right? New trucks are coming, that sort of thing, but it was just everything we could do to protect our schedule, right? Now, one of the reasons why we were even able to take this on, though, is because we've been doing mechanical design in-house for years. So we understood the process a lot differently than most builders would because of that extra work that we've been doing. So it wasn't a crazy leap for us to think about taking this on, because we did understand it. It was just the timing was atrocious, and it's hurting our schedule badly right now. But we've now got some sub trades that are coming in to fill out the schedule, and we're getting on track. But ultimately, between our houses, our partnership with Carwood, and in our apartment units, we're looking at potentially 400 units a year. So that's a pretty decent sized HVAC company, right? And so we like to talk about AeroBarrier a lot. We've been doing a lot of work with AeroBarrier Canada over the years, doing a lot of testing. We've done semis where we've got a semi home that most builders can't get under 5 air changes an hour, down to, I think we did one at 0.22 air changes for a semi that was about 1,200 square feet. That's pretty cool, right? Well, we have the London market rights for AeroBarrier, and we're this fall later on going to be adding it to Abode Home Comfort as part of our portfolio. And the reason is because we look at this as such a game-changing technology, especially when you're looking at semis or towns or apartment units. As I said before in a previous session, you know, if you can smell your neighbors cooking, you're dead before the fire gets to you, right? Because it's the smoke that's going to kill you, not the fire, right? We see that as is probably one of the most critical pieces of why this technology is so cool. The other piece, though, of course, is about durability of the building. And we know that the two most important things we have to deal with is water penetration and air management, airflow management. And this is such a game changer. So our apartment building that we're doing at 300 Manor, I'm going to show it in a few minutes. It's actually, we're compartmentalizing all of the suites, and we're getting it down to under 1 air change per hour for each suite, which is, you know, pretty incredible for an apartment building. Okay, another quick bullet question: has your company tested panelized framing?
It'd be interesting too, Doug, to know, are they doing panelized framing from a plant, or are they looking at doing it themselves, right?
We actually have a builder in Michigan that has been in contact with us over the last few weeks, and they're really interested in having us develop this process for them, like the actual how to make it work of the mobile plant, and then building them a kit that they can lease from us, right? So that might be a sideline that we didn't even see coming, but we are looking at that because, you know, if you're getting it from a plant, they control it, but I can see it being the developer brings it in and does all the framing for the builders there, right? Like we're going to get to that point because of the labor crisis.
Yeah, interesting. So we had one yes out of the group.
Cool. All righty. So the mid-rise apartment construction. This is, you know, not all builders are going to do this, but I did want to briefly cover this off because I see the housing crisis just getting worse and worse. And we have to be able to provide opportunity for people to live, right? Mm-hmm. So we're doing a couple of different things on the housing crisis, and this is one of them. So this is just a bit of a poke in the eye here, but the 70s called, they want their details back. This building right here is actually being built in St. Thomas, and it is just junk, right? You've got, for a lot of different reasons, it basically breaks all the cardinal sins of the 4 principles of modern design, right? You've got a high carbon footprint because it's concrete and steel. You've got terrible indoor air quality because of the way it's being constructed. It's like, it's just one big HVAC system going in, so there's no suite control. You've got bad occupant comfort because that glass is going to be brutal. It's just really bad. And also because the concrete's continuous, right? So this really is not thinking in terms of where we need to be going. And that's why I love it as a great jump off point to show, you know, it's got cheap commercial windows. I know I've talked about low solar glass on all 3 of the previous sessions. Again, this has got high solar gain windows. I'll guarantee it. Poor water management detailing, so your climate resilience is not there as well. There's so many mistakes in how that water penetration detail is being done around those windows. It's just, quite frankly, pathetic, right? And it's,
Doug, what is that? Is that just a fluid applied, just painted around the windows, and the windows are dropped in?
No, it's stick-on.
Oh, it is a stick-on. Okay.
It's not even fluid applied. It's a stick-on, and you can actually see areas where it's got a rippling effect where water's going to migrate into the window opening
underneath the window. Sure.
Yeah. And above.
Are those balconies off to the left?
Yeah, those balconies off to the left are concrete, and the concrete runs continuous. There's no thermal break between that and the floor.
Right.
So that floor at the outside wall there will be cold for about 6 feet in before you're going to start to finally have the floor warm. Now in the summertime, when it's like 95 degrees out or whatever, it's just going to act like a radiator, right? So it's going to pull heat into the building. There's just no way to balance that building out. And then they're making it an even greater travesty by having one mechanical system. So this is actually west facing here. The windows on the west of this building are going to fry in July and August, right? I don't know how you're going to gain comfort in this, but it's still currently permitted to be built this way, right? Versus this building here is meeting the 2030 challenge. You know the Architecture 2030 challenge?
Yeah, AIA 2030.
Yeah, this building is designed to meet the Architecture 2030 challenge. In fact, it goes a bit beyond that because it's looking at carbon reduction as well. So this isn't just about operational carbon for net zero, it's about going beyond that. So here we've got a net zero.
Doug, is this one a true net zero, so it includes solar?
Yes, sir. The solar's not on it yet. It goes actually a little bit beyond that. We're going to go through a couple of slides of this, but it's triple pane, low solar glass, continuous exterior insulation. It is a net zero building that will have solar on it. It's panelized wood frame construction. It's got individual suite climate control, and it's got proper water management detailing, including a sloped roof. Mm-hmm. Wow. Is that ever cool, right? And you know what? It was just featured by, we've got Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation up here in Canada. Mm-hmm. This home qualified for their funding. And so this home was actually featured in a major press conference release there a week or so back with our company, promoting the fact that this is an advanced building that qualified for their funding for building affordable housing. So not only is it going to be probably the most comfortable building in St. Thomas, but it's also affordable rent rates, right?
Great. How many units?
And we're still, this is the smaller one. I think this one is 16 units, and then the larger building adjacent to it is 44. So it's a total of 60 units in this site. We also did aero barrier compartmentalization on this. So we got it down to under 1 air change per hour. We like that. Again, it improves energy performance of the building. It reduces the noise between units, which is another great feature, and then the safety feature as well. So here's a little bit of our marketing literature on this. In our mind, this is an important point, Aaron, because it's going beyond the whole concept of going net zero energy. In 5 years, we're not likely to see that many gas vehicles being produced anymore. It's transitioning to electric that fast. So this building right here, right out of the gate, so the two buildings, I should say, 60 parking stalls plus, 25%, so about 80 parking stalls total. The first 20 stalls being installed have electric charging stations, and it's roughed in for all the remainder to be added as the vehicles transition out to all electric. So we're looking at why build a building that's already obsolete, that's going to have a major cost to retrofit in, if we can just right out of the gate start off with doing it the right way by putting in the charging stations and the rough-ins, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a really, really cool point that you don't really see unless I point it out, right? So 20 car charging stations, rough-in formator, panelized framing, indoor air quality detailing. You saw the graphenstone before. We're using zero VOC paints on the walls, but also on the south-facing side of the one building, there's hydro lines running along that building, right? So we're using a product called ProShield from Graphenstone that actually blocks Wi-Fi and RFID and electromagnetic frequencies, helping to make the building safer for the occupants, because some people really react negatively to that. It's almost like an allergen or a toxin to them. And they react very poorly to it. So we're making sure that the building's occupants are safe from the electromagnetic frequencies that are basically directly adjacent to their building. Which leads us to LifeARK. So the next projects that we're doing are we're moving beyond net zero into what I call LifeARK. And so the Canadian Home Builders Association has a pilot project going right now to build net zero MURB buildings. And so this one here, 50 Styles Drive, the smaller building of the two. There's a big building and a smaller building. The smaller building is part of the CHPA Net Zero pilot project, and it's unique because it's the only one in the pilot. Therefore, it's the only one in all of Canada that's designed with a common hallway and elevator. Typically, a MURB is, townhomes or stacked townhomes, that sort of thing. But we think there's a sweet spot here for small apartment buildings as well. So we're pretty excited about that. But we're also using this to introduce LifeARK, right? What is LifeARK, Doug? Well, here's the thing. We have to think in terms of buildings having to be designed to go off grid, emergency power for up to a week at a time. Now, I was previously talking about Texas when we were talking about this. And, a really fun story is it's happened here in Ontario twice. So there was 2003 where we had the Northeast blackout. Do you remember that at all? Hearing about that? We lived through it. It was the second most widespread power outage in history. And we were down for about a day and a half, right? But other areas, there was many days getting back online. It really took quite a while to get back up. The other one, though, was the mega blizzard of 1978. Now, at that time, I was at home with my eldest brother was back from university, and our grandpa Tom was staying with us, Tom Terry. Mom and dad were off doing a Caribbean cruise or whatever. They got stuck in Rochester, New York on the way back. This blizzard came in, and it was hell on wheels for 4 days. And so my brother Greg kept us all alive and well by having the fireplace in the basement had an open pit that he would use for cooking. And so we were able to cook and stay warm, but we had about 6 inches of water on the bottom of the floor. He got some pallets out and got us across so we could walk across the floor, but really kind of took great care of us. But this was a couple months after the staff Christmas party that my dad had for his staff in the trades. And they always used to hang out in the basement back in the day of a house that was under construction. They'd knock back a ton of whiskey and rum and what have you, and then they'd all drive home. We don't do that anymore though, right? So, while this is happening, Greg and Gramps found about a case of rum that my dad had left over from this party, right? The Captain Morgan rum. And so Gramps would say, son, can I have another shot of that Dr. Morgan for my stomach's sake? So Greg would oblige him, and then he'd have one too. Well, by the time mom and dad got back, Gramps and Greg had drank the case of rum, right? In 5 days, it was gone. That's some pretty fast drinking for two guys, especially one in his 70s. Anyway, my dad's walking in, he's got the luggage under his arms, and he's tired and he's cranky, and he's finally glad to be home. And Gramps says, son, the hound drank all your rum. Just threw him right under the bus, right? Well, that was Grandpa Tom. He was kind of a character. Why do I tell the story? Because it's important to remember that we were really lucky that we had a fireplace there. My brother Greg was able to keep us, from being unwell, because it was really bad, right? And so right now, today, my heart really goes out to the folks down in New Orleans and in Louisiana. They're knocked off grid, and they're going to be offline for quite a while. And so what I'm proposing here is that we start looking at buildings that can survive the hit and then be able to be offline for a week at a time, maybe longer, right? So how do we do it? Well, you have to have net zero as your base design, and you got to follow the 4 principles that I lay out. That's kind of number one. Then we're looking at geothermal for heating and cooling. This is a deep drill vertical well, 700-foot closed loops. Solar energy for electrical loads. So we need to be able to run the ERV, the fridge, and some emergency lighting, as well as the geothermal pumps. Rainwater storage that can be pumped into a tap for emergency toilet flushing. In the off time when it's not needed for emergency purposes, we're planning on using it for irrigation purposes. Then we're looking at energy storage options. How are we going to manage can we use a biogas microcogen? Is it cheaper than batteries? And maybe that cogen is an area where it's okay to have a bit of a carbon footprint here rather than lose the building, right? So I think that there's scenarios there that we have to really dive deeper into. But what we want to do is we want to develop this concept and create an industry-wide program. So Aaron, you're talking about building a building, your own, right, coming up.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be cool if you had a building that met these standards and had this level of capability within it and was still cost effective to build?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Part of how we do that, maybe we got to become our own utility. So we're putting the solar on there. We're putting the ground source heat pump in there. We're actually looking at, well, we can charge for heating and cooling by charging by BTU, right?
Right.
And if it's a highly efficient building, it's going to be pretty cost effective for the occupants to pay their bills, right? So it's where we see the necessary next step beyond net zero energy and even net zero carbon is how do we create that greater level of climate resilient construction? And that's, like I said, it's one of the 4 principles is really getting into the climate resilient construction. Now, you've talked a couple times with me here about doing carbon offsets. So we've got the buildings lowered down as far as we can. What do we do next, right? Well, I think that there's potential here for what I call the developer to step up to the plate. So the developer, are they a friend or are they a foe, right? Can they get on board and recognize that they've got a part to play in this, right? So I believe that developers have a big role to play in carbon offsets directly in the sites themselves. And what we have to really do as an industry, encourage the developers to do this. So I believe, like the Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. If you create it in your development, you can create higher value for your property at the same time as creating a carbon storage opportunity. Sam Rashkin talks about this a lot. If you go to his boot camp, the first half day is basically on taking your development sites from a C up to a B plus or from a B to an A. And part of that is by developing amenities that clients want. So yeah, parks and playgrounds, they're important, but so are walking trails, naturalized spaces, and tree plantings and groupings of trees. Reducing grass should be a desired outcome. We just don't need as much grass as we put into these sites. Storm ponds should not look like a fenced-in penitentiary. How do we make it so that they're appealing and attractive? And can we interconnect them, right? So a new slogan for our company in the last little while is, we don't just build for humans. So this is part of the longtime efforts of my brother Greg's work on biodiversity. But we think it's pretty cool what he's been able to accomplish over the years. So on the far left, that's a mature swim pond. It's about 25 odd years old now, and it looks like it's been there forever, right? It's on Golden Pond, right? The osprey nest, he took telephone posts that were being discarded by Hydro One, convinced them to let him have them. And he put osprey posts up around with nests on them around Lake Margaret, because we knew that the ospreys love to fish there, right? It took about 4 years, but this year, that's a nesting pair that photo is, right? And then where we had our playground area and our park, what we did is we took a swath around the park and we naturalized it. So that's a field of poppies right there and other wildflowers. And it was so popular when it came out this year that we had tourists coming and taking photos of it. You know you're on the right track when tourists are coming to your community to take photos of something that they don't regularly see. And then, of course, things like wood duck boxes. So we're trying to create biodiversity here. We understand the interconnectivity of having links so that animals can move back and forth. It's really incredibly important to look at pollinators and how to make sure that we're creating biodiversity for that. This is part of what we believe is our social contract with the environment, is that as a developer, we have to do more of this, right? Well, you know what's really cool? The customers love it. And they're prepared to pay a bit more for having an environment like this to live in, right? So then how do you get them to be able to enjoy it? Oh, sorry. Microforests and connecting trails. Now, there's a big movement about microforests happening right now. It's actually by a Japanese gentleman who was an agricultural professor out of Japan. And his movement is moving worldwide now. And it's about having small, diverse species of woodlot plantings clustered together, and then having a corridor link for animals to be able to migrate. Ironically, Greg, my brother, he'd been doing this for 20 plus years before I'd even heard of this gentleman from Japan who just recently passed. So that's really cool to see that, kindred thinking can happen from, continents away if we are thinking about the planet and our stewardship of it. So I mentioned before about not making the storm pond a penitentiary. The one on the right here, that's actually right on our walkway. So our multi-use trail, people with wheelchairs, I love riding it on my bike. People that are walking, you go by this, and it's just so cool to see the biodiversity. And then the Lake Margaret Trail, and then vegetated streams, and then the Butterfly Meadow Trail. These are all interconnected trails that we created, right? And so people are coming to St. Thomas where we're developing this, and they love it because they don't get this in most communities that are being developed, right? But so do the animals, and they don't realize that it's not normal. Like, they just see that it's there, and they have the deer walking down in the middle of the day and all kinds of great stuff. I have to watch out for the snapping turtles though, Aaron.
Yeah, I bet.
The next bit.
When you say swim, it's not because I want to swim in that pond. What is it?
No, swim is stormwater management.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, we call them a swim pond, but yeah, it's a stormwater management pond. It's just, it fits faster on plans for the subdivision if you put swim pond on it. Everybody knows the short form of it, right?
Got it.
So the next bit is, and I alluded to part of it, part of our social contract is doing these types of plantings and helping enhance the environment. But we believe that creating a social contract is extremely important for our business plan and for successful businesses moving forward, because clients are changing. So we did a SWOT analysis of what good might look like, and what we found is, as a company, to remain profitable, we had the financial ability to address people, planet, and profit, and we had the weakness of having to be able to get our company buy-in for the community commitments, because when we want to do this, we want to make sure that the whole team is on board if we're doing something, or certain members of our team want to participate, giving them those opportunities. So that's really a communication piece. The opportunity is the cost is partly offset for reducing our tax burden, and it's enhancing our image with our clientele. The threat is consumers looking elsewhere if we don't commit and we don't actually promote it and let the consumers know we're doing it. So our proposed solution on this is we have created 3 community streams of involvement for funds. We're adding a sustainability officer and a director of community engagement to our company. And then we're also creating a social contract with our employees, our community, and the environment. And we really see that as critical, that folks understand what we're doing. So for example, we're putting away every month. We did an acid test on our finances a couple of months back, and realized that if our revenues dropped by 75%, we would need X amount of dollars. I think it was roughly $2 million to be able to continue for a year and maintain our current levels of staffing and commitments if the bottom fell out in a major recession. So we're now putting to side a contingency plan so that if we do have that downturn, we're able to maintain the vast majority of our staffing, so that when we come out the other side, we don't have to go through all that pain of restaffing. And I know I've talked to Gene about that in the past, that one of the hardest things that happens in the construction industry is you go through a downturn, you get rid of a big chunk of your staff, and then you got to try and figure out how to get everybody back afterwards. So we just don't want to do that. In the 2008 recession, we didn't. We leaned it out and we kept everybody. And that's our intent for the next time a big crunch comes, that we're going to be prepared for it. That's part of the social contract with your employees. We're also moving towards having an employee share ownership plan. We want to move from being a family-owned company into being an employee-based company. And that's happening over the next, hopefully, 12 months. On the fundraising side, we created three pots, basically. One is community fund with a local trust association, and it's an annual donation based on a percentage of our profits to help with the overall community. And this is just community goodwill to help people that are really desperately in need right now, because there's a lot of people hurting. And then we're looking at large one-off projects that we do. Previous years, we did Project Hope. Right now, we're involved this year and next year with Tiny Hope. I'm going to get into that in a second. And then upcoming will be a community hospice, because we don't have one in our community. And then we have an annual donation budget, and it's one of our staff members runs this, and this person has full latitude to make decisions on giving donations, so that we're much faster and can able to help more quickly. The only caveat is if it's above 10 grand, come back and talk to me and we'll work out. But they've got a fairly decent budget. And I said, don't be afraid to spend it, but make sure you're engaging with other people and trying to leverage it within the community so we get more good. Right? So here's an example of what we're involved with. This is Project Tiny Hope. So this is being done with the YWCA in partnership with Doug Terry Homes and Sanctuary Homes. Our builder partner, Carwood Homes, that does our apartment buildings, is also actively involved with us. And we're actually designing different homes for this, and also the apartment buildings. So it's a mixture of 20 apartment units and 20 tiny homes. And we're working with Fanshawe College. They did all the massing for us for this, which I'm about to show, and the layout, right? So that we're able to take this old brownfield site that was Elgin handles. They made handles for wheelbarrows and for shovels and that sort of thing many, many years ago. And it was on a railway spur, so it's got contaminated soil. We've already done the site cleanup, but now we're going to be doing a community build next year. And so this community, when it's finished, will include edible landscaping, community gardens, in different plantings, as well as we're templating this so that, you know, any community, any city that's looking at doing something for homeless and at-risk low-income families, we'll gladly share our information out into the industry with this as we move forward. It's all being done as net zero, but what's really cool is as we move forward, like I said, it's reclaiming a brownfield site, but on the 5th anniversary of our Project Hope, we're planning to do a race, Aaron. So what we're going to do is we're inviting other builders to come and race us to build tiny homes, and we're hoping to do about 12 of them over one weekend.
Nice.
It should be great fun. And if you're going to do something stupid, I've always found if you're going to do something stupid, get the film cameras going and film it, because you never know, it might be worth seeing later, right?
Yeah.
So it's directly adjacent to a community trail network, and we're enhancing it with having a really nice playground that's going in there, so that, you know, there's going to be quite a few young moms that are going to be coming through here with little families. We want them to feel that they're being taken care of, right? And not, you know, being ostracized into something that's, you know, slums or whatever. This is going to be a real catalyst for revitalizing this part of our downtown, and it really directly needs it. So we're really excited about taking this dormant site and turning it into something over the next little while. This is just a quick example of what we're looking at. So we're thinking this will all be probably panelized kits, almost like you get a kit for building a shed, only it's a big shed, right? And so it'll take a lot of planning. It'll take us, you know, probably the next 9 to 10 months to really plan it out. Right now, the only rule that I've put in place is that you can't use a helicopter, right? So no dropping a completed building right in sight. You have to at least move it. But we're going to have race marshals in the whole 9 yards. So hopefully we pull it off. We've done stupid stuff before, and it seems to work out. But we're pretty excited about it. We've got a couple other builders already lined up, and they're fired up about doing this. So we'll keep you posted on that. So the last survey question I got is, does your company have a social contract?
Great. We'll get that survey up, Doug. And
it's pretty cool, eh?
Yeah, it's incredible. Well, again, it's exactly what you promised. It's beyond net zero, right? And I think what you're really putting together is, if you had to write a sustainability report for Doug Terry Homes and the associated businesses, you've really got every piece of it. You've got people, planet, profit. You've got environmental, social governance. You've got that whole mission and social contract and employee contract all in one.
Yeah, that's actually, we came to the conclusion that we're hiring a chief sustainability officer in the next couple of months, because we need to get after that. We see that the economy, especially the building industry economy, we're really, you know, we're ripe for taking a kick in the teeth on social media, especially as it gets harder and harder for people to find homes. So I truly believe that we've got to do everything we can to differentiate ourselves from those that are not doing enough, to show that we have good conscience, and that's going to make a difference, from taking it on the chin versus, you know, having people where they're builder of choice, because there's just not really much of an option at this point, right? That's right. I want to live here.
I mean, what's interesting, Doug, is, I think you showed phenomenal things of lean, Kaizen, MUDA, and that Toyota production system and how you apply that. But if you look at most of the companies that are successful across North America today, almost every one of them has a social contract, has a social mission today. It's almost becoming table stakes. And I think you're really leading the way for home builders and apartment builders to be thinking about this.
I just see it as we have no choice. I think it's going to come at us far faster than we in our industry are thinking it is. Most builders don't even have this on their radar. And I think we've got like a few years at best, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to be really problematic if we don't get after it. So that's why we're really trying to make sure that we're showing people here's a different way, right? Not everybody's going to agree with me, and that's okay. But this is what I believe, right?
Yeah.
And I do think it's going to be extremely important.
Yeah. Doug, you want to open it up to questions? If anybody has questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat. Or
sure. We're just coming into the last the glide path in. Why build a 100-year home, right? And
keep those questions coming while Doug finishes up this part.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Why should we build a 100-year home? Okay. When we think about the decisions to build a home, there's so many different things we have to deal with as builders. It can be really daunting to have to think about affordability, customer choice, durability, health, a variety of different complex issues that hit you day after day after day, supply chains being stretched. How am I going to manage all this? So I can appreciate when builders would say, why are you making me think about building more than code, right? On the other hand, the homes we are building, really, they should last 100 years. Now, a code-built home will get you to around 40 to maybe 50 years if you're real lucky, and you will have stuff going to the trash bin before then. So I think that we do have a bit of a moral obligation, an imperative, if you will, to look at how we build our homes. And I think because of this moral obligation, it's really critical that we look at the 4 principles, right? So 4 principles, this is the wrap up of the 4 days now. Reduce our carbon footprint, including embodied carbon. Include climate resilient construction to help the home to be more durable, to withstand more severe and more frequent storms. We don't want it going into the landfill because it rotted out. Improve indoor air quality of our homes and design for occupant comfort. So I had the fun, the misfortune, what have you, over the last while, this past winter, of renovating a home. Now, this was for my daughter and my grandson that I every week have shown a picture of. This home has got that famous 1970s cantilevered kitchen, right? And you know the saying, they don't build them like they used to, Aaron. Yeah, well, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, right.
So that cantilever kitchen, that's the one where the builder would say to the resident, well, just run the tap slightly in the winter time so your taps don't freeze, right?
And keep the cupboard doors open when it's cold.
Keep the cupboard doors open when it's cold, exactly. So it wasn't just the lack of wall insulation, it was also the fact that you had that cantilever so the floor was cold, but it was also the roof pushed out without having any type of bump out the roof. So there was virtually no insulation above that wall. And that's what leads to having the condensation happening, and that's what ends up making the wall rot, right? So we know that that's a real bad detail, but when we took those cabinets off, it was just like, oh boy. And we ended up ripping the entire back wall of the kitchen off and part of the roof and part of the floor. We had to redo the whole thing, right? So, you know, we want something that's going to last longer than 50 years. Because when we look at that whole life cycle analysis of the carbon reduction piece, right? If it's going to the landfill after 25 years, and hopefully recycling for materials and products gets a lot better, but it's increasing the carbon footprint of the home, right? So we have to look at durability. I know certain things are going to need replacing at some point. Windows do need to get replaced, that sort of thing. Hopefully they're more recyclable, but walls needing to be replaced due to rot, that's just bad detailing. And when it happens in 5 years, that sort of thing, like what's happened in Pittsburgh with that big class action suit down there, that's crazy what's going on with the amount of walls that are rotting. Well, in Ontario, we just did this whole thing of converting over to having rigid insulation on the outside without getting printed poly on the inside. We've got that poop sandwich, right? And so we're just as susceptible, or more so, as we build tighter, more efficient homes with more insulation and less drying, right? So we have the knowledge and the capacity to do better, and I truly believe that we need to. But here's another really interesting tidbit. And I don't know how much of a music fan you are. 1991, man, it was a watershed year for music. There was so many great albums. I mean, Nirvana's Nevermind dropped, right? And that was mind-blowing for me. And I was an old Clash fan, The Who fan, that sort of thing, but loved it. Pearl Jam had their 10 album come out. Soundgarden, all kinds of bands came out with just fabulous music that year. But you know what? It was also a watershed year in politics. Do you know that's the year that President Bush Sr. and Prime Minister Mulroney signed the air quality agreement between our two countries? And that's also known as the Acid Rain Treaty, right? And I can remember before that started to get cleaned up, we had really bad acid rain coming across here because of all the plants in Indiana, right? And it was amazing the difference it made. These, let's not forget, were conservative politicians that understood the need to conserve, right? This was truly groundbreaking efforts to save our planet. And unfortunately, I don't think our leaders have done very much sense, really. I mean, in the big picture sort of things, I believe we can't count on the politicians. The times have changed, and far too often the politicians now are just unable to govern because they're so tied up with, I don't agree with you, so you're my enemy. And that's just a terrible place we're in right now. So I believe we have to lead in the absence of leadership. With heat domes that kill hundreds, massive hurricanes like the one that just happened the other day, that are displacing tens of thousands, with wildfires that are scorching our west, changing weather patterns. Lake Mead's at its lowest level I think it's ever been, whereas here in the Great Lakes, they're nice and full. We're getting all kinds of rain. Please stop the rain. And now rain over the peak of the Greenland ice pack. Like, that's crazy, man. That ice pack melts, and don't buy land in Florida because it's not going to be there, right? But yet we still have climate deniers in power. And so the question I say is, why do we need to build a 100-year home? Because we must. That's really the reason. But as I'm always fond of saying, there is hope. Now, if you come to the conference, I'm going to play this video. But hope is really about creating a movement where we start to look out after each other, because we have to do a better job of that, right? We got one planet. We got a lot of people that we need to live, work, play, and be around together. We've got to do a better job of taking care of each other and stop this politicalized rhetoric on the left and the right. Doesn't matter. Just let's take care of each other a little bit better. And that's the closing message I want to leave you with today. So today's takeaways: developing lean thinking, advanced framing and waste. Panelization is a disruptive technology. Should we be looking at it? What about the LifeARK concept? Developer, friend, or foe? Can we look at microforests and getting them more on board? Looking at doing a social contract, and then of course, why build the 100-year home? So Aaron, thank you to Eva for allowing me to come and dialogue for 4 weeks. It's been a blast. I hope it was informative, and thanks, man. This has really been a pleasure.
Yeah, Doug, absolutely fantastic, and thank you for your leadership on this important topic. I think it's really interesting when you see some of the leaders across North America and around the world where they're heading. Doug calls it kick it. I call it herd, because it's easy to remember, but it's healthy, it's electric, it's resilient, it's decarbonized, right? That's where we need to go. And Doug, don't you feel like the younger generations that are coming into their prime home buying years, they kind of expect this from us, and it's changing in everything that they buy. Why wouldn't it change in how they want to buy a home, right?
That's the great fear I have, is that the social contract will not become an option. It'll become a very much so needed necessity because the home buyers are changing.
Yeah, and I think if you don't adopt that continuous improvement mentality and don't change, do you end up in a situation where you're General Motors or Ford, and someone else comes along and moves your cheese, right? They eat your lunch.
Yeah.
And then to pivot after that, it becomes really difficult. So we're open for questions. If anybody has anything, you can put it in the chat section. Just a lot of thank you very muches. And so maybe with that, we'll call it good. And Doug, we'll look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, man. I'm not looking forward to all the COVID tests, but I'm looking forward to seeing folks there.
Awesome. All right, Doug.
Cheers, man. Thanks.
Bye.